Marcus Crawford stares at three identical faces in his office. Children he swore didn't exist. His pregnant wife vanished 4 years ago from the shed where he locked her. Now she's back with his triplets, a lawyer, and evidence that could destroy everything he's built. The DNA doesn't lie. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. The rain hammered against the shed's tin roof like 1,000 angry fists, and Melody pressed both hands against her swollen belly, feeling the baby's kick in protest of the cold that seeped through every crack in the wooden walls. 6 months pregnant with triplets, and her husband had locked her out here like some unwanted animal. She could see the main house from the small window, every light blazing, warm and golden, and she knew Marcus was in there with her, with Victoria, the woman who'd somehow convinced her husband that his pregnant wife was nothing more than a burden to be hidden away. It hadn't always been like this. God, it hadn't always been like this. Melody closed her eyes and let herself remember the Marcus from 2 years ago. The man who'd smiled at her across the hospital cafeteria where she worked as a nurse. The man who'd brought her coffee every morning for 3 weeks before finally asking her name. He'd been different then. Or maybe he'd just been better at hiding who he really was. She'd fallen for his quiet intensity, the way he listened when she talked about her dreams of opening a free clinic someday, the way he'd held her hand during their 3rd date and told her he'd never met anyone who made him want to be better. The wedding had been small, just the way she wanted it, in her grandmother's garden with white roses and too much champagne. Marcus had cried when she walked down the makeshift aisle, and she'd believed those tears were real. She'd believed everything was real. They'd moved into his family's estate, the massive Crawford mansion that had been in his family for 4 generations. And at first, she'd felt like Cinderella. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts, always anticipating needs before they were spoken. But fairy tales don't mention how cold castles can be. How the echo of your footsteps in empty hallways can make you feel more alone than you ever felt in your tiny apartment. His mother had hated her from the start. Eleanor Crawford had taken one look at Melody's brown skin, her natural hair, her nursing scrubs, and decided she wasn't good enough for her son. The comments had started small, little cuts disguised as concern. Dear, don't you think you should do something with your hair before the charity gala? Melody, perhaps you could let the staff serve dinner. You're not quite used to our way of doing things. Marcus, darling, are you sure this is the kind of woman who can represent the Crawford name? But Marcus had defended her then, had held her close at night, and whispered that his mother would come around, that love would win, that they'd build their own family and their own traditions. The pregnancy had changed everything. She'd been so happy when the test showed positive, could still remember the way her hands had shaken, as she'd planned the perfect way to tell him. She'd made his favorite dinner, bought a tiny pair of baby shoes, wrapped them in blue paper even though they didn't know the gender yet. But when she'd told him, when she'd placed those little shoes in his hands, his face had gone pale. Not happy pale, not overwhelmed with joy pale, but something else entirely. Something that looked almost like fear, or maybe anger, or maybe both tangled together in a way that made her stomach drop. That was 4 weeks ago, just 4 weeks, and it felt like a lifetime. He'd barely spoken to her after that night. He'd moved his things to a guest room, started coming home later and later, stopped looking at her when they passed in the hallways. And then Victoria had appeared. Beautiful, blonde Victoria with her designer clothes and her musical laugh, and her way of touching Marcus's arm that made Melody's chest tight with something that felt like drowning. Eleanor had introduced them at a dinner party, and Melody had watched her husband's face light up in a way it hadn't in weeks. She tried to tell herself she was paranoid, that pregnancy hormones were making her imagine things. But then she'd found the texts, seen the way Victoria's name appeared on his phone screen at all hours. Come over, I need to see you. I can't stop thinking about you. She makes me miserable. You make me feel alive. Each message had been a knife between her ribs, twisting deeper with every word. When she'd confronted him, he'd looked at her with eyes so cold she barely recognized him. What did you expect, Melody? You trapped me with this pregnancy. You knew I wasn't ready for kids. You did this on purpose to lock me down." The accusation had stolen her breath. She'd never trapped anyone. The pregnancy had been as much a surprise to her as to him. But she'd been happy about it, had assumed he would be too. They'd talked about children before, hadn't they? Or had she just heard what she wanted to hear, built a fantasy out of casual comments and wishful thinking? The doubt had crept in like poison, making her question everything, every memory, every moment they'd shared. Then came the ultrasound appointment. The one where they'd discovered it wasn't just one baby, but 3. Triplets. The technician had been so excited, congratulating them, talking about how rare and special it was. Melody had looked at Marcus, hoping to see that joy reflected in his face. But he just stared at the screen with an expression she couldn't read. On the drive home, he'd been silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. When they'd pulled up to the house, he'd finally spoken. "This is too much. I can't do this. I won't do this." She'd tried to reason with him, tried to hold his hand, tried to remind him of the man he'd been when they met. But he'd pulled away like her touch burned him. Over the next week, she'd watched him retreat further and further into himself. Or rather, into Victoria. The other woman had practically moved into the house, taking meals with the family, sitting in what used to be Melody's spot at the dinner table, laughing at Eleanor's stories, while Melody sat alone in her room, feeling the babies move inside her, and wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The first night in the shed had been 2 weeks ago. She'd woken to find Marcus standing over her bed, his face hard in the moonlight coming through the curtains. "Get up. Pack your things. You can't stay in the main house anymore." She'd thought he was joking at first, some cruel game to hurt her. But he'd been serious, deadly serious, and when she'd refused to move, he'd called 2 of the estate security guards. They'd been gentle about it, apologetic even, but they'd still escorted her out of the bedroom she'd shared with her husband, down the stairs, through the kitchen where the night staff had looked away in embarrassment, and out to the gardener's shed at the edge of the property. It was barely insulated, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, with a cot, a space heater that worked half the time, and a battery-powered lamp. There was a bucket in the corner that she was supposed to use as a toilet, though sometimes she'd sneak into the main house's servant entrance late at night to use a real bathroom. Marcus had told the staff she'd chosen to stay out here, that she was being dramatic and difficult, that she'd refused the perfectly good guest room he'd offered. It was a lie, all of it. But who would believe her word over his? He was Marcus Crawford, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, respected businessman, pillar of the community. She was just the nurse he'd married in a moment of weakness, the woman who'd gotten pregnant to trap him. At least that's what Eleanor was telling everyone. Melody had thought about leaving so many times. She'd lie awake at night, feeling the babies move, and imagine packing what little she had and just walking away. But where would she go? Her mother had passed away 3 years ago, her father had never been in the picture, and she'd lost touch with most of her friends after the wedding. The way Marcus had slowly isolated her, always finding reasons why they couldn't visit, why she couldn't go out, why she needed to stay home with him. She had maybe $300 in her personal account. Everything else was in joint accounts Marcus had frozen the minute she'd confronted him about Victoria. She had no car. Marcus had taken her keys. She had no phone. He'd confiscated that too. Said she couldn't be trusted not to spread lies about him. The cold was getting worse, seeping into her bones despite the 2 thin blankets she huddled under. She could feel the babies moving constantly now, as if they knew something was wrong, as if they could sense their mother's fear and desperation. Sometimes she talked to them, whispered promises that she'd get them out of this, that they'd be safe, that she'd find a way to give them the life they deserved. But in the quiet moments, when the rain stopped and the night pressed in from all sides, she wondered if she was lying to them, if she was as powerless as she felt. The shed door burst open and Melody's heart lurched. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expensive suit somehow still crisp despite the rain, his hair perfectly styled like he'd just stepped out of a magazine. Behind him, Victoria peered in with obvious disgust, her nose wrinkled like the shed smelled of something foul. "Look at you," Marcus said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Living like this because you're too stubborn to accept reality." Melody pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to preserve what little warmth she had. What reality is that, Marcus? That you've decided your pregnant wife is disposable? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think you're some kind of victim here? You think people will feel sorry for you? I've already told everyone the truth, that you're unstable, that the pregnancy has made you paranoid and aggressive, that I've done everything I can to help you, but you keep refusing treatment. Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. It's really sad, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. The way you've convinced yourself that Marcus still wants you. Can't you see he's moved on? Can't you see that what you had was just a phase he had to get through? Something inside Melody shifted then. Some last piece of hope or faith or love that had been hanging on by a thread. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This man who'd locked his pregnant wife in a shed, who'd brought his mistress to mock her, who'd chosen cruelty over compassion at every turn. This was not the man she'd married. Or maybe it was. Maybe this had always been who he was and she'd been too blinded by love to see it. I want a divorce, she said quietly. I want out of this marriage, out of this family, out of this nightmare. Marcus's expression didn't change. Fine. But you won't get a penny. I'll make sure of that. You'll leave here with nothing, and everyone will know you're a gold digger who tried to trap me with a fake pregnancy. Melody felt the blood drain from her face. Fake pregnancy? I'm 6 months along with your children, Marcus. There's nothing fake about it. He shrugged. Prove it. Prove they're mine. For all I know, you were sleeping around before we got married. I have a lawyer who'll argue that in court, who'll drag your name through so much mud you'll never work as a nurse again. Victoria laughed, a bright, cheerful sound that made Melody want to scream. You should see your face right now. It's priceless. You really thought you'd live happily ever after, didn't you? God, you're even more naive than Eleanor said. Melody's hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay calm, to think. She'd been a nurse for 8 years before meeting Marcus, had saved money, had built a career. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now, but she could find it again. She had to find it again. For her babies, if not for herself. Get out, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Both of you, get out of my shed. Marcus took a step forward, his face twisting with something ugly. Your shed? This is my property. Everything here is mine, including you, until the divorce is final. And trust me, that's going to take a very long time. I'm going to drag this out, make you suffer for every inconvenience you've caused me. You want to leave? Fine. Leave tonight. Leave right now. But you leave with nothing. Not a coat, not a dollar, not a shred of dignity. Melody stood up, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and slow. But she stood. Fine. I'll leave with nothing. I'll walk out of here in the rain with no money and no phone and nowhere to go. And when these babies are born, when the paternity test proves they're yours, when everyone sees what kind of man you really are, you'll have to live with what you did. You'll have to live with the fact that you threw away your own children because you were too weak to be a father. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes then. Something that might have been guilt or shame or just anger at being called weak. But Victoria grabbed his arm, pulled him back toward the door. Don't listen to her, baby. She's trying to manipulate you. Come on, let's go back to the house. I'll make you feel better. They left, leaving the door open so the rain blew in, soaking the floor, the cot, everything Melody owned. She stood there shivering, watching them walk back to the main house, arms around each other, and she made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would find a way to protect her babies and build a life for them. And someday, somehow, Marcus Crawford would regret every choice he'd made tonight. The next morning, Melody was gone. The shed was empty except for the blankets and the battery-powered lamp, its light growing dimmer as the batteries died. When the groundskeeper found it that afternoon, he reported it to Marcus, who shrugged and told him to clean it out, that the problem had solved itself. Eleanor threw a dinner party that night to celebrate Victoria's official moving in, and if anyone noticed that Marcus drank more than usual, that his smile never quite reached his eyes, that he kept glancing at his phone as if waiting for a message that never came, no one mentioned it. 4 years passed. Marcus married Victoria in a lavish ceremony that was featured in 3 different magazines. Eleanor got her perfect daughter-in-law, blonde and poised, and from the right family. The Crawford Pharmaceutical Company launched 2 new drugs and doubled its profits. Marcus was named one of the city's most eligible bachelors before the wedding, then one of its most successful young executives after. Life was perfect. At least that's what he told himself every night as he lay next to Victoria and tried not to think about the pregnant woman he'd locked in a shed. The woman who'd disappeared into the rain and never come back. He'd tried to find Melody at first, had hired a private investigator after the first week of silence. Not because he wanted her back, he told himself, but because he needed to know where she was, what she was doing, whether she was telling people stories about him. But Melody had vanished completely. No credit card usage, no hospital records, no social media presence, nothing. It was like she'd never existed. The investigator had eventually given up, suggested that maybe she'd left the state or even the country, that some people just didn't want to be found. Marcus had buried himself in work, in his new marriage, and pretending that he hadn't done something unforgivable. But sometimes, late at night when Victoria was asleep and the house was quiet, he'd remember the look on Melody's face that last night in the shed. The way she'd stood up despite being exhausted and freezing. The way she'd promised he'd regret it. The way she'd walked out into the rain without looking back. He'd told himself she was being dramatic, that she'd land on her feet, that he'd actually done her a favor by letting her go. But deep down, in a place he never let himself examine too closely, he knew he'd become exactly the kind of man he'd once promised himself he'd never be. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was in a board meeting, discussing a merger that would make him even wealthier, when his assistant interrupted with an apologetic smile. "Sir, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's urgent. She says her name is Melody Parker." The room went silent. Every board member turned to look at Marcus, whose face had gone pale. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice sounded uncertain even to his own ears. "She's not on the schedule," the assistant continued. "But she has 3 children with her and a lawyer, and she says if you don't see her right now, she'll wait in the lobby where all your employees and clients can see her and ask questions." Marcus stood up, his legs somehow unsteady. "The meeting is adjourned," he said, ignoring the confused looks. "We'll reconvene tomorrow." He followed his assistant to his office, his mind racing. Melody was here, after 4 years of nothing. Melody was here with children, with his children, because what other children would she have? Melody was here with a lawyer, which meant this wasn't a social call, wasn't a reconciliation, wasn't anything good. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and pushed open his office door. She was more beautiful than he remembered. That was his first thought, and it made him angry at himself for thinking it. Melody stood by the window, her back straight, her hair natural and pulled back in an elegant twist. She wore a navy suit that looked expensive, professional, nothing like the old Melody who'd lived in scrubs and comfortable clothes. Behind her, 3 car seats sat in a row, and in them, 3 identical faces stared at him with huge brown eyes. The babies he'd never believed were real. The children he'd convinced himself didn't exist or weren't his, were right there in front of him. 4 years old, and absolutely, undeniably his. Next to Melody stood a woman in a sharp gray suit, holding a leather briefcase. "Attorney Jennifer Walsh," the woman said. "I represent Miss Parker in her paternity suit against you." Marcus's throat felt dry. Paternity suit. "This is unnecessary," he said, trying to sound calm. "If Melody wants to discuss the children, we can do that privately, without lawyers." Melody turned from the window, and the look she gave him could have frozen fire. "You lost the right to privacy when you locked me in a shed while I was carrying your children. You lost the right to reasonable discussion when you threw me out into the rain. You lost every right you ever had to my consideration or mercy. Now sit down, shut up, and listen to what we came here to say." The lawyer pulled out a folder, set it on Marcus's desk with a decisive thump. Inside were DNA test results from 3 accredited laboratories, all confirming with 99.9% certainty that Marcus Crawford was the father of Melody Parker's triplets. There were medical records documenting her pregnancy, her difficult delivery, the months of recovery. There were photographs of the shed, time-stamped and professionally documented, showing the conditions she'd been forced to live in. There were witness statements from estate staff members who'd quit after seeing how she was treated. There were text messages between Marcus and Victoria, between Marcus and Eleanor, discussing strategies to discredit Melody, to paint her as crazy, to make sure she left with nothing. 4 years of child support, the lawyer said. 4 years of medical expenses. Compensation for emotional distress. Compensation for defamation of character. And most importantly, a binding custody arrangement that gives Miss Parker primary custody with the option to restrict your access based on the children's well-being. Marcus stared at the papers, his mind spinning. This can't be legal. You can't just show up after 4 years and demand. I demand nothing, Melody interrupted. I have proof, I have witnesses, and I have 3 children who deserve a father who'll actually acknowledge their existence. The question isn't what I can demand, Marcus. The question is what you're willing to lose when this goes to court and becomes public record. His hands shook as he picked up the DNA results, saw his own name next to percentages that didn't lie. These children, he said softly, looking at the 3 identical faces watching him with curiosity and wariness in equal measure. What are their names? Melody's expression didn't soften. That's not information you've earned yet. The lawyer will contact your attorney with our demands. You have 72 hours to respond. After that, we file in court and everything becomes public. Every text message, every witness statement, every photo of that shed. Your company, your reputation, your perfect new marriage, all of it gets examined under a microscope. Or, you can settle privately, pay what you owe, and establish a relationship with your children on terms that protect them from the man who threw their mother away. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain that he'd been scared and overwhelmed and manipulated by his mother and Victoria. But looking at Melody now, seeing the strength in her spine that hadn't been there 4 years ago, seeing the confidence and power she'd built from nothing, he realized that nothing he could say would matter. He'd made his choices. He'd locked a pregnant woman in a shed. He'd thrown her out in the rain. He'd tried to destroy her reputation to protect his own. Those were facts, unchangeable and unforgivable, and now he had to live with the consequences. We'll be in touch, Melody said, and she picked up the first car seat, balanced it on her hip like she'd been doing it for years. The lawyer picked up the other 2, and together they walked toward the door. Melody paused at the threshold, looked back at him one last time. You were right about one thing, she said. I was too stubborn to accept reality. But I learned. I accepted that you weren't the man I thought you were. I accepted that I had to save myself because no one was coming to rescue me. I accepted that my children deserved better than a father who saw them as a burden. And now you have to accept the reality that actions have consequences, Marcus, even for people like you. Especially for people like you. The door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. Marcus stood frozen in the middle of his office, staring at the space where his children had been moments before. Children. He had children. 3 of them. 4 years old, with his eyes and Melody's determined chin, and expressions that looked far too serious for kids who should have been playing with toys and watching cartoons. What kind of life had they lived while he'd been pretending they didn't exist? What had Melody told them about him? Did they know they had a father who'd thrown their mother away like garbage? His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Dinner at your mother's tonight, don't forget. Wear the blue suit, she likes it. He stared at the message, feeling something twist in his chest. His perfect life, his carefully constructed reality, suddenly felt like a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze to knock it down. Victoria didn't know about Melody's visit. His mother didn't know. The board members who'd witnessed his pale face and shaking hands didn't know the details, but they'd remember his reaction. People would start asking questions, and he had 72 hours to figure out answers that wouldn't destroy everything he'd built. He called his personal attorney, Richard Blackwell, a man who'd gotten Marcus out of more than one messy situation over the years. Richard answered on the first ring. Marcus, what can I do for you? I have a problem, Marcus said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. A big problem. Melody's back. There was a pause. Your ex-wife, Melody. The one who disappeared 4 years ago. She's not my ex-wife, Marcus corrected. We never finalized the divorce. And she didn't just disappear, Richard. She left because He stopped, the words catching in his throat. She left because I made her leave. And now she's back with 3 children and a lawyer and enough evidence to bury me. Richard's tone shifted from casual to professional in an instant. Don't say another word on the phone. Come to my office now. Bring any documentation you have about the marriage, the separation, everything. And Marcus, I mean everything. If there are skeletons in this closet, I need to know about them before her lawyer does. Marcus hung up and grabbed his coat, but before he could reach the door, it opened. Victoria stood there, her blonde hair perfect despite the wind outside, her smile bright until she saw his face. Baby, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, he had. Nothing, he lied. Just a difficult meeting. Business stuff. She moved closer, wrapped her arms around his waist in that possessive way she had, like she was marking her territory. Well, whatever it is, it can wait. We need to leave for your mother's in an hour, and you know how she gets when we're late. Marcus gently extracted himself from her embrace. Actually, something's come up. I need to meet with Richard. It's urgent. Victoria's smile faltered. More urgent than dinner with Eleanor? You know she's been planning this for weeks. She wants to discuss the charity gala and our role in it. The charity gala. Right. The annual Crawford family event where they raised money for various causes and Eleanor could show off her perfect son and his perfect wife to all her perfect friends. The irony of raising money for children's hospitals while Marcus had 3 children he'd never acknowledged wasn't lost on him. You'll have to go without me, he said. Tell her I'm dealing with a major business crisis. It's not technically a lie. Victoria's expression hardened. This is becoming a pattern, Marcus. You've been distant for weeks. Distracted. Is there something you're not telling me? Everything inside him wanted to scream yes. Yes, there's something I'm not telling you. There's a lot I'm not telling you. Starting with the fact that I'm still legally married to someone else, and I have 3 children I never told you about. But instead, he smiled that practiced smile he'd perfected over years of business negotiations. Just work stress. The merger is complicated. I'll make it up to you. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her calculating, weighing whether to push or let it go. Finally, she stepped back. Fine. But you owe me, and I'm going to collect. She left, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, and Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. How had his life become such a complicated web of lies? When had he turned into the kind of man who could look his wife in the eye and deceive her without flinching? The answer came immediately, unbidden. The day he'd decided keeping up appearances was more important than being a decent human being. Richard's office was downtown. All dark wood and leather chairs and walls lined with law books that probably cost more than most people's cars. Marcus had been here dozens of times, usually to handle contracts or business disputes. Never for something personal. Never for something that made his hands shake as he signed in at the reception desk. Richard met him in the conference room, closing the door and activating a white noise machine before sitting down. Talk, he said simply. So Marcus did. He told him everything, starting with the pregnancy announcement and ending with Melody's appearance in his office that afternoon. He told him about the shed, about Victoria, about the texts and the lies, and the way he'd convinced himself he was the victim in all of this. Richard listened without interrupting, his face impassive, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When Marcus finally finished, the silence stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. This is bad, Richard said finally. This is very, very bad. The shed alone is enough to destroy you in court. Add in the documented evidence, the witnesses, the fact that you've been living with another woman while still legally married, and you're looking at paying out more than just child support. She could go after your assets, the company, everything. Marcus felt his throat tighten. What do I do? Richard leaned back in his chair. You settle. You give her whatever she wants. You sign whatever custody agreement she proposes. and you pray she's willing to keep this quiet. Because if this goes to trial, if it becomes public, your reputation is finished. The company's stock will tank. Your mother will probably disown you. And Victoria, well, I'm guessing she doesn't know any of this. Marcus shook his head. Richard let out a low whistle. So you're looking at losing everything either way. The question is whether you lose it privately or publicly. I need options, Marcus said desperately. There has to be something we can do. We could argue that she abandoned the marriage, that she's been hiding the children deliberately to maximize her payout. We could claim she's financially motivated. Richard gave him a look that was equal parts pity and disgust. Marcus, I'm your lawyer, not your conscience, but let me be clear. Any attempt to paint her as the villain here will backfire spectacularly. She was 6 months pregnant when you locked her in a shed. She has photographs. She has witnesses. She has medical records showing the difficult birth she went through alone while you were… What, exactly? Playing house with your girlfriend? The words hit like physical blows. That's not, Marcus started, but Richard cut him off. Save it. I don't care about the excuses. I care about keeping you out of bankruptcy and possibly jail. Yes, jail. What you did could be considered spousal abuse, emotional cruelty, maybe even negligence given her pregnancy. If she wanted to press criminal charges, she probably could. The fact that she's only asking for child support and custody tells me she's being remarkably restrained. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to accept her terms, negotiate where we can, and you're going to be grateful she's not asking for more. Marcus felt the walls closing in. What about Victoria? What about my mother? What do I tell them? That's your problem, Richard said bluntly. But my advice? Tell them the truth before Melody does. Because trust me, if this goes to court, everyone is going to know everything. Better to control the narrative now than have it control you later. The meeting ended with Richard promising to contact Melody's lawyer first thing in the morning to begin negotiations. Marcus drove home in a daze, his mind spinning with impossible scenarios and unavoidable consequences. The house was dark when he arrived, Victoria still at his mother's dinner party. He poured himself a scotch, then another, standing in the kitchen where 4 years ago he'd watched security guards escort Melody out into the rain. Had she stood here that night, looking back at the life she was leaving? Had she been scared, wondering where she'd go, how she'd survive? He told himself she'd be fine, that women like her always landed on their feet, that he was actually doing her a favor by cutting her loose. But the woman in his office today hadn't looked grateful. She'd looked strong and successful and completely done with him. She'd built a life without him, raised 3 children without him, become someone powerful and confident without him. And the worst part was realizing that she'd probably done all of it better than if he'd stayed. The sound of the front door opening pulled Marcus from his thoughts. Victoria's heels clicked across the marble foyer, her voice carrying that particular edge it got when she was annoyed. Marcus, are you seriously still up? It's past midnight. He turned to find her standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her makeup still flawless despite the long evening. How was dinner? He asked, though he didn't really care about the answer. She rolled her eyes. Your mother was insufferable, as usual. She spent half the night asking where you were, and the other half making passive-aggressive comments about your commitment to family. I had to make excuses all night, and honestly, I'm getting tired of it. Family. The word hit him differently now. He had a family, a real one, with 3 children who shared his DNA and probably hated him. Or worse, didn't know he existed at all. Victoria, we need to talk. Her expression shifted to something wary. Those are words no woman wants to hear at midnight. What's going on? Sit down. She didn't move. Just tell me. Marcus took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. I was married before. Before you. Before we met. Her name is Melody. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. I know you were married before. You told me you were divorced, that it was over, that she'd left. That's the thing, Marcus said. We never actually got divorced. And she didn't leave, not really. I made her leave. I was cruel to her, Victoria. Worse than cruel. The color drained from Victoria's face. What do you mean you never got divorced? We're married, Marcus. We had a wedding. We signed papers. We have a marriage license. How can you not be divorced? Because I never filed the papers, he said quietly. Because I told myself she'd disappeared and I couldn't find her. But the truth is I didn't try very hard. I wanted to forget she existed, so I just pretended the marriage never happened. Victoria's voice went cold. Are you telling me our marriage isn't legal? That I've been living a lie for 4 years? Marcus, I gave up job offers for you. I put my career on hold. I played the perfect wife for your mother and your business associates. I defended you when people said you were cold and calculating. And now you're telling me it was all fake? Not fake, Marcus tried. What we have is real. I just made a mistake in the past that I'm trying to fix. A mistake? Victoria's voice rose. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or double booking dinner plans. This is fraud. This is... She stopped, her eyes widening. Oh my God. The woman in your office today. That was her, wasn't it? That's why you looked like you'd seen a ghost. He nodded slowly. She came back. She has children, Victoria. My children. 3 of them. 4 years old. Victoria stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You have children? 3 children? And you never thought to mention this? They weren't born when I met you, Marcus said, but even as he said it, he knew how weak it sounded. She was pregnant when we separated. I didn't know for sure they were mine. You locked a pregnant woman out of her home, Victoria said slowly, her face a mask of disgust. That's what your mother meant when she made that comment about the shed. I thought she was talking about renovations, but she was talking about your wife, your pregnant wife. You locked her in a shed. Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain the context, the pressure from his mother, the fear of being trapped. But looking at Victoria's face, he saw his own reflection. This was who he'd become. This was the man he'd turned into. Yes, he said simply. I did. And now she's back with a lawyer and evidence and she's going to take me for everything I have unless I settle. Victoria took a step back. Unless you settle. That's what you're worried about? The money? Not the fact that you have 3 children you've never met. Not the fact that you destroyed an innocent woman because she had the audacity to get pregnant with your babies. What do you want me to say? Marcus snapped. That I'm a terrible person? I know that. That I made mistakes? I know that too. But I can't change the past, Victoria. I can only deal with the present. And right now I need to figure out how to keep this from destroying everything. She laughed, a bitter sound. Everything? You mean your reputation, your company, your money? Those are the things you care about. Not the woman you hurt, not the children you abandoned. She shook her head. I don't even know who you are. You're right, Marcus said quietly. You don't. And maybe I don't either anymore. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Victoria spoke. I need time to think. I need to decide if I can even look at you right now, let alone stay married to you. Assuming our marriage is even real, which apparently it isn't. She turned and walked toward the stairs, then paused. Those children? What are their names? Marcus felt his throat tighten. I don't know. I didn't ask. Victoria's expression said everything her words didn't. She climbed the stairs without looking back, and Marcus heard their bedroom door close, then lock. He spent the night on the couch in his study, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the last 4 years. Every choice, every lie, every time he'd convinced himself that he'd done the right thing. The morning came gray and cold, matching his mood perfectly. His phone rang at 7 sharp. Richard, Marcus answered. Tell me you have good news. Not exactly, Richard said. I spoke with Jennifer Walsh, Melody's attorney. She's willing to negotiate, but her terms are steep. How steep? $400,000 in back child support and medical expenses. Another $200,000 for emotional distress. Full primary custody with supervised visitation for you until the children are comfortable. which could take months or years. And she wants you to publicly acknowledge them as your children. Marcus closed his eyes. Publicly? That means Victoria finds out. My mother finds out. Everyone finds out. Victoria already knows, Marcus said. I told her last night, and I'm pretty sure our marriage is over. There was a pause. That might actually work in your favor, Richard said carefully. If you're no longer presenting yourself as married to Victoria, the bigamy issue becomes less complicated. And if you're willing to be honest about what happened, Melody might be more inclined to keep the details private. She doesn't want to hurt you, Marcus. She wants to protect her children and get what they're owed. What they're owed. Right. Because he owed them everything. Their entire lives, their sense of security, their father's presence, all the things he'd denied them because he'd been too weak and selfish to face his responsibilities. Set up a meeting, Marcus said. With Melody, without the lawyers. I need to talk to her face to face. Richard hesitated. Are you sure that's wise? I don't know if it's wise, Marcus said. But it's necessary. I need to at least try to explain, to apologize to. He trailed off. To what? Fix 4 years of damage in one conversation? It was impossible, but he had to try. The meeting was set for that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory that didn't belong to either of them. Marcus arrived early, ordered a coffee he didn't drink, and sat at a corner table watching the door. When Melody walked in, he was struck again by how different she looked. Not just physically, though she was undeniably more confident and poised, but in her entire bearing. She carried herself like someone who'd been through fire and come out stronger. She sat down across from him without ordering anything. You have 30 minutes, she said. My friend is watching the kids, and I don't like to leave them too long. The kids. His kids. What are their names, he asked. That's what you want to know? Not how I survived after you threw me out? Not where I've been for 4 years? Not how I gave birth to your children alone in a county hospital with no family and no support? Just their names? I want to know everything, Marcus said. But I thought starting with their names might be appropriate since I should have asked that 4 years ago. She studied him for a long moment. Maya, Marcus, and Michael. You named one after me? He couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Melody's expression hardened. I named him after the man I thought you were. The man who held my hand on our 3rd date and told me he'd never met anyone who made him want to be better. Not after the man who locked me in a shed. Marcus flinched. Melody, I'm so sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, does it? No, she said simply. It doesn't. But I didn't come here to listen to your apologies. I came because Jennifer said you wanted to talk. And because despite everything, I don't want my children to grow up wondering why their father never wanted them. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign the settlement agreement. You're going to pay what you owe. And then, if and only if you prove you're serious about being a father, you'll get supervised visits. Emphasis on supervised. What do I need to do to prove I'm serious? Marcus asked. She leaned forward. Everything you didn't do the first time. Show up. Be consistent. Put them first. Not your image or your money or your convenience. Learn their favorite foods, their fears, their dreams. Be the kind of father who makes them feel safe, not the kind who makes them wonder if they're a burden. Can you do that, Marcus? Can you be someone other than the man who threw me away? I don't know, he said honestly. But I want to try. I want to meet them, to know them. I want to be part of their lives if they'll let me. Melody was quiet for a moment. That night in the shed, when you came with Victoria to mock me, I promised myself that if I survived, if my babies survived, I would never let anyone make me feel small again. I worked 3 jobs while pregnant, Marcus. I lived in a women's shelter. I gave birth in a hospital where I knew no one, where I had to sign papers saying I understood the risks of a triplet pregnancy without proper prenatal care. The babies were premature, spent 6 weeks in the NICU, and I sat by their incubators every day praying they'd live because they were all I had left. His throat felt tight. How did you manage? There was a nurse, Melody continued, her voice softer now. Maria. She took an interest in my case. helped me apply for assistance programs, connected me with a charity that helps single mothers. She and her husband became like family to me. They helped me get back on my feet, watched the babies when I went back to nursing school for my nurse practitioner degree. I worked my way up, Marcus. I built a life from nothing. I bought a small house in a good neighborhood. My children go to a good preschool. They have everything they need, and they have a mother who loves them more than anything in this world. And you know what the hardest part was? Not the poverty, not the exhaustion, not even the birth. It was explaining to them why everyone else had a daddy and they didn't. What did you tell them? Marcus asked quietly. That their daddy was very far away, Melody said. That sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people, but that it didn't mean they weren't loved. I never told them you didn't want them. I couldn't bring myself to do that, even though it was true. I wanted them to grow up believing they were wanted, even if it was a lie. It wasn't a lie, Marcus said, then stopped. No, that's not true. It was a lie. I didn't want them. I was terrified of them, of what they represented, of the responsibility. But Melody, I'm not that person anymore. The last 4 years living with Victoria pretending to be happy. It's been hollow. I see that now. Melody stood up. I'm not here to absolve you, Marcus. I'm not here to make you feel better about your choices. I'm here to make sure my children get what they deserve, which is financial support and the opportunity to know their father if he can prove he's worth knowing. So here's what happens next. You sign the papers. You start therapy, because you clearly need it. And in 3 months, if your therapist clears you and you've shown consistent effort, you can meet Maya, Marcus, and Michael. Not before. I won't have you traumatizing them the way you traumatized me. 3 months, he repeated. That's a long time. It's nothing compared to 4 years, she countered. And Marcus, if you flake out, if you decide this is too hard or too inconvenient, don't bother coming back. They deserve better than a father who's there when it's easy and gone when it's hard. I understand, he said. And Melody, for what it's worth, I truly am sorry. For everything. I know you are, she said. But sorry doesn't raise children. Sorry doesn't pay for their food and clothes and education. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I spent crying because I was so tired and scared and alone. Actions matter, Marcus. Not words. Let's see what your actions say. She left and Marcus sat there for a long time, staring at his untouched coffee. That evening, he signed the settlement agreement without trying to negotiate. Richard was surprised, but Marcus didn't care. The money didn't matter. Nothing mattered except trying to become someone worthy of knowing those 3 children. He started therapy the next week with a woman named Dr. Sandra Chen, who didn't let him deflect or make excuses. She made him examine every choice, every belief, every moment that had led him to lock his pregnant wife in a shed. It was brutal and necessary, and some sessions he left feeling worse than when he arrived. But slowly, painfully, he started to understand the man he'd been, and the man he wanted to become. Victoria moved out 2 weeks after their conversation. She'd consulted her own lawyer, and discovered that their marriage was indeed invalid, which meant she owed him nothing, and he owed her everything for wasting 4 years of her life. They settled privately, Marcus giving her far more than Richard thought was wise, but he didn't argue. She deserved compensation for his lies. His mother was another story. Eleanor Crawford had built her entire identity around her perfect family, her successful son, her impeccable reputation. When Marcus told her about Melody and the children, she'd actually laughed. You can't be serious. You're going to acknowledge some woman's children just because she claims they're yours. This is obviously a scam, Marcus. Don't be naive. They're my children, Mother, Marcus said firmly. I had the DNA tests verified independently, and even if I hadn't, I would know just by looking at them. They have my eyes, your nose. They're Crawford's, whether you like it or not. Eleanor's face had gone hard. If you do this, if you publicly claim these children, you'll destroy our family's reputation. Everything your father built, everything I've maintained, gone because you couldn't keep your personal life private. Then I guess I'm destroying it, Marcus said, because I'm done choosing reputation over doing the right thing. I'm done being the kind of man who throws people away when they become inconvenient. His mother didn't speak to him for a month after that. The company board was more pragmatic. They were concerned about the optics, about how the story might affect stock prices. But Marcus's lawyer crafted a statement that was honest without being salacious. Crawford Pharmaceuticals. CEO Marcus Crawford has acknowledged paternity of 3 children from a previous relationship and is working to establish a relationship with them. He asks for privacy during this personal time. The stock dipped for a day, then recovered. Apparently having secret children was scandalous, but not disastrous in the pharmaceutical industry. The 3 months crawled by. Marcus went to therapy twice a week. He read books about child development, about being a father, about repairing broken trust. He set up trust funds for each child, more money than they'd ever need. He bought a smaller house, something family-friendly with a yard and a swing set, even though he didn't know if they'd ever visit. He learned to cook simple meals that kids might like. He practiced reading children's books out loud, feeling ridiculous but doing it anyway. And every night he looked at the photo Melody had reluctantly sent him. 3 beautiful 4-year-olds with serious expressions in his eyes, and he whispered their names like a prayer. Maya, Marcus, Michael. The day finally came. Melody had agreed to let him meet them at a park, somewhere public and safe. Marcus arrived 30 minutes early, his hands sweating despite the cool autumn air. He dressed casually, not wanting to look intimidating, and he'd brought 3 stuffed animals, then worried that was too much, too presumptuous. He was still debating whether to put them back in his car when he saw them. Melody walking across the grass with 3 small hands held in hers, 3 pairs of legs running and skipping, 3 voices calling out about a butterfly, about a dog, about everything with the enthusiasm only 4-year-olds possessed. They were beautiful. God, they were so beautiful it made his chest hurt. Maya wore a yellow dress and kept stopping to pick flowers. Marcus, his son, his namesake, had his serious expression and seemed to be explaining something complicated about clouds. Michael was the adventurous one, pulling toward the playground equipment with barely contained energy. Melody saw Marcus and said something to the children. They all turned to look at him, their expressions curious and cautious. She led them over slowly. "Kids," she said gently. "This is Marcus. He's a friend of Mommy's who wanted to meet you. Not their father, not yet." He understood that. That title had to be earned. "Hi," Marcus said, his voice rough. "It's really nice to meet you all." Maya hid behind Melody's leg. Young Marcus just stared. Michael waved enthusiastically. "Hi. Are those for us?" He pointed at the stuffed animals Marcus hadn't realized he was still holding. "Yes," Marcus said, kneeling down to their level. "If it's okay with your mom." Melody nodded, and Michael ran forward to grab a dinosaur. Maya slowly emerged to take a bunny. Young Marcus accepted a bear with a solemn nod that was so painfully familiar Marcus almost couldn't breathe. "Can we play now?" Michael asked, already running toward the swings. Melody laughed, the first genuine laugh Marcus had heard from her in years. "Yes, baby, go play. Be careful." The children ran off, and Melody and Marcus stood watching them. "They're amazing," he said quietly. "Thank you for this, for letting me meet them." "Don't thank me yet," Melody said. "This is just the beginning. They're going to have questions as they get older. Hard questions, and you're going to have to answer them honestly." "I will," Marcus promised. "Whatever they need to know, whatever you need from me, I'll do it. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did." "You can't make up for it," Melody said, but her voice was gentler now. "You can only do better going forward. Those kids deserve a father who shows up, who's present, who doesn't run when things get hard. Can you be that person?" "I'm going to try," Marcus said. "Every single day I'm going to try." They stood in silence for a moment, watching Michael fly high on the swings while Maya collected pine cones and young Marcus built an elaborate stick structure. "You've done an incredible job with them," Marcus said. "They're happy, confident." "That's all you, Melody. It wasn't easy," she admitted. "There were nights I didn't think I'd make it. Nights when all 3 of them were sick and I was running on 2 hours of sleep trying to keep us afloat. But Maria and her husband, they helped. The women's shelter, the charity nurses, the community that showed up when I had nothing, they all helped. And the kids themselves, they were my reason to keep going. Every time I wanted to give up, I'd look at their faces and remember that they needed me to be strong. So I was. Marcus felt humility wash over him, genuine and profound. You're the strongest person I've ever met. What you did, surviving that, building this life, raising 3 children alone, I don't know how you did it. Because I had to, Melody said simply. Because they deserved a mother who fought for them. And now they deserve a father who does the same. So are you going to fight for them, Marcus? Are you going to show up not just today, but every week, every month, every year? Are you going to be there for school plays and scraped knees and teenage heartbreak? Because that's what being a parent means. It's not grand gestures. It's showing up for the small moments, the boring moments, the hard moments. Yes, Marcus said. Yes to all of it. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm asking for the chance to earn it. From you and from them. Melody turned to face him fully. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for them. Every child deserves to know their father if it's safe for them. And I believe, despite everything, that you won't hurt them the way you hurt me. That you've learned something from your mistakes. Don't prove me wrong, Marcus. Because if you do, if you let them down, I will make sure you never get another chance. Do you understand? I understand, Marcus said. And I won't let them down. I swear on everything I have, I won't let them down. The children played for another hour. Marcus pushed Michael on the swings, admired Maya's flower collection, and listened gravely as young Marcus explained his stick architecture. It was the best hour of his life. Over the next year, the visits became regular. Every Saturday at the park, then every Saturday plus Wednesday dinners, then overnight visits at Marcus's house with the swing set that finally got used. The children slowly warmed to him, especially Michael, who was naturally trusting. Maya took longer, but the day she fell asleep on his shoulder during a movie, Marcus felt something in his chest crack open. Young Marcus was the most reserved, watching and evaluating with those serious eyes, but Marcus was patient. He showed up. He learned their favorite foods, their bedtime routines, their fears and hopes. He attended Maya's dance recital and Michael's first t-ball game, and young Marcus's science fair where his volcano actually worked. His relationship with Melody remained complicated, but gradually softened into something like friendship. They learned to co-parent, to communicate about the children's needs, to support each other during difficult moments. She started her own nurse practitioner practice, and Marcus helped with the business side without trying to take over. She met someone new, a teacher named David who was kind to the children, and Marcus was surprised to find he was genuinely happy for her. She deserved love, real love, the kind he'd never been capable of giving her. One evening, nearly 2 years after that first park meeting, Marcus arrived to pick up the kids for the weekend. Melody invited him in for coffee while they finished getting ready, something she'd never done before. They sat in her small, warm kitchen, so different from the Crawford mansion, and she said quietly, "You've changed." He looked up, surprised. "Have I?" She nodded. "You're not the same man who locked me in that shed. That Marcus was scared and selfish and cruel. This Marcus shows up for his children. This Marcus does the work, goes to therapy, admits when he's wrong. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad the kids have you in their lives." Coming from her, those words meant everything. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me this chance, for raising them to be such incredible humans, for being the parent I should have been from the start." Melody smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "We're both their parents now. That's what matters." The children ran in then, Maya wearing mismatched socks she'd insisted on, Michael dragging a backpack full of toys, young Marcus carrying a book about space. "Daddy," Michael shouted, the name that had gradually replaced Marcus over months of visits. "Daddy, can we get pizza tonight?" "Whatever you want, buddy," Marcus said, his heart full. He'd spent years chasing the wrong things, money and image and his mother's approval. But this, his children calling him Daddy, Melody trusting him enough to let him be part of their lives. This was what actually mattered. This was what made him rich in the ways that counted. As they left, Maya took his hand. "I love you, Daddy," she said casually, like it wasn't the most profound thing anyone had ever said to him. "I love you too, Princess," Marcus replied, his voice thick. "All of you. So much." Young Marcus looked up at him with those serious eyes. "We know. Mommy says you're learning to be a good dad. Are you?" Marcus knelt down so they were eye level. "I'm trying every day. And even when I make mistakes, I promise I'll always keep trying. Because you three are the best thing that ever happened to me." "That's good," young Marcus said with a solemn nod. "We like having a dad." The drive to his house was filled with chatter about school and friends, and the new superhero movie they wanted to see. Marcus listened to every word, made mental notes, asked questions. This was his life now. And it was better than anything he could have imagined. Better than the cold mansion, better than the perfect image, better than the shallow existence he'd built on lies. He'd lost everything once. His reputation, his marriage to Victoria, his mother's approval. But in losing all that, he'd found what actually mattered. His children, their laughter, their trust, their love. And maybe, just maybe, he'd found himself too. The man he'd always been meant to be, if he'd just had the courage to choose love over fear. It had taken losing everything to learn that lesson, but at least he'd learned it. At least he got the chance to be better, to show up, to be the father his children deserved. And every single day he was grateful for that chance. Grateful to Melody for her mercy. Grateful for second chances he knew he didn't deserve but had been given anyway. Because love, real love, wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up, day after day, doing the work, being present. It was about 3 kids in mismatched socks and superhero capes, arguing over pizza toppings and calling him Daddy, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And it was. It finally was.